Hello everyone, I'm Brooks Page and welcome to our show Money Talks. Today we have on our show Julie Haley. She is the owner of Property Source Pros, and we thank you for being here, Julie.
Well, thank you for having me, Brooks.
Good. Julie, tell us a little bit about your company and a little bit about yourself. And I know dealing in baseball, I know your husband Jeremy, and I think y'all just moved right behind us. So we're neighbors now,
That's right.
So that's great. But anyway, just tell us a little bit about your company, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background.
Well, my name is Julie Haley. I am the broker and the owner of Property Source Pros. It's a real estate firm on the square next to the Art Center. And I have owned that firm since 2010. I've been in real estate since about 1997. I started out in Athens doing a lot of multifamily property management, and then went into some leasing and management of strip centers, big retail centers. And now I'm selling real estate here in Hartwell, and I love it. I love the lake, and I'm very glad we live here.
Okay, well, good. Now tell us some questions that most people want to know is when they're choosing a realtor, what are some questions they need to ask them? What are some key questions and some pointers on who to use and what to ask?
Right, okay. Well, are they asking for a realtor to list the house, or are they asking for a buyer's agent?
Let's say list a house.
Okay, well, if you're listing, you want to see if they will give you a comparative market analysis and tell you how they're coming up with a list price, instead of just guessing. It's nice to see the background behind it. An advertising plan. Are you going to just put it on MLS and hope the phone rings, or do you have a systematic plan for getting the property out there, and what might that plan be? And then one of the most important things, I think, is deciding on a communication style. I have a lady I was talking to about an hour ago that I'm listing her house, but she's recently had jaw surgery. So she said, don't call me on the phone, I won't answer. She wants me to text her. But then sometimes you have people, particularly that aren't computer savvy, that they only want you to call, or, how often do you call, that type of thing. And then some of the millennials and Gen Zers that are, starting to get into the real estate market now, they have, they're highly internet savvy and app savvy, and they would much rather you talk to them, send them information that way than calling them on the phone. So, so you got to find a balance of what works. But by and large, it's just who you get along with and who you want to have that relationship with. So.
So when somebody's deciding if they have a piece of property and they want to sell it, and they want to decide how much should they list it for, should they get a realtor's opinion? Should they go out and get it appraised? Tell us what the process is there, what you would suggest.
I mean, you can definitely have an appraisal done if you want to pay the money for it, but any realtor that you talk to about listing their house should be able to provide you a comparative market analysis, which is an analysis of the houses that are selling in the area and that are similar to your houses. So if you have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that's in the city, then we should be able to find, just like an appraiser would, the 3 most recent sales that are close to your house, that are similar to your house style and age and size, and determine what those sold for and let you know without you having to pay somebody $350 to get that information.
We all know how important location is. That's all you hear realtors say, location, location, location. So that's very important. So when somebody decides to list a property with a realtor, what are the different terms? I mean, is it a 6-month contract, 1-year contract, 2-year? Tell me how that works.
For me, it really depends on the property. Land, particularly large acreage tracts, I would much rather have even a year on than 3 months, because that's a limited number of people that are going to be looking for that property. If it's a hot property and you're willing to price it at my recommendation, then 3 months, 4 months, it should be fine. But that's going to depend, and the season depends differently too. In the spring, you don't have to go for 6-month, 1 years usually, because things are moving pretty fast. But if you start in October, people in November and December are buying Christmas gifts. They're not really looking at land. In January, they're sitting at home with their feet near the fire. So, so you want to go a longer period of time if you're not starting in the spring.
So if I had a property list with you for a year, for example, and that year is over, and then I sell it to a person, you had to send it to me, don't I still owe you?
There is, and that's negotiated in the listing contract, the length of time for that. So you can make it no time, or I've seen some that went as long as 9 months afterwards, which I thought was a little bit extreme. But typically, I think 2 to 3 months after the period of the listing, just so if somebody is interested in your house, they can't just wait it out as easily. You know, they kind of do me right by coming to me and talking to me and getting
So
it done.
before a seller lists a property, or if a buyer decides he wants to buy a property, let's talk about property inspections. Do you recommend them? I know that when you get a property inspection, they're going to find something.
Right.
So is it smart for a seller to go ahead and get that done, or is it just up to what they decide to do, or sometimes none may be needed at all? So
right.
What do you think?
First of all, I think the buyer should always get a home inspection. Even if the seller has a professional home inspection done, I still think the buyer should get their own inspection. The buyer beware, you know, it's the buyer's responsibility, and they're the ones that are going to end up with the house. On the seller doing it up front, I'm kind of torn on that, to be quite honest. And if you find out for certain something is wrong with your house because you have had it inspected by somebody and they've pointed it out, then you are obligated, and I, as your agent, am obligated to tell every buyer who comes by about this defect. If you don't know about it, then we can't tell about it.
That's right.
But then you don't like surprises either. So, and in general, I think it's good to do kind of your own personal inspection of the house. And you should be able to tell if there's a roof leak in your house, or you know, if you have floors that are falling in, you're probably going to know that. And if you have friends in the business that have ever done construction, almost everybody has an Uncle John who's done part-time construction or something. Maybe let them come through and look and tell you if there's anything they see immediately that they think you should take care of.
Okay.
But by and large, as a seller, you just want to make your house look as marketable as possible and hope that there's no hidden defects in there. And if there are, then you'll find out when the buyer finds out, and there's no sense knowing that and telling them. But
That's right. I understand. So commissions, as far as what the realtor charges, are they different for different types of property? Like land, is there different percent for that compared to a house? And do you suggest that the seller add it to what they really want for the property, or how does that work? Of course, we know everything's negotiable, but that goes. But and also, are commission percentages negotiable between a seller and the realtor, or is it just a set standard for all realtors?
It's not a set standard for all realtors. We're not allowed to do that. So it is very dependent on the agencies that you're working with. Sometimes it could be negotiable between the agent and the seller, but some firms, if an agent is not the broker of their firm or the owner of their firm, some firms may have set rules on what your commission rates need to be, and they won't let you negotiate without talking to the broker first and getting permission and going through those routes. So, so you can negotiate it some. By and large, I recommend that people price their house at what it's going to sell for, and not what they want plus the commission added on top. We set what it's going to sell for first, and then understand that the commission will come off of that. And I would say it's definitely different based on the type of property. I do land at 8%, whereas I would do houses at 6%. Some people do 7% and 10%. And so that's something that changes from agent to agent. I am the broker and owner of my firm, so I have all of my commission splits. I will lower if only my agency is involved in the sale for my listings, because I don't have to share it with another agency. But also, you kind of want to have a good commission rate on there, because you want if you have a piece of land and your neighbor has a piece of land for sale, you don't want the other realtors going to your neighbor's piece of land instead of yours, because you're only going to pay a cheap commission and the neighbor's paying a regular commission. So you don't want to get too far away from the norms of what is going on, even though we're not allowed to set a norm.
Now, commercial property, is it higher?
I do 8% for it too. In land, I do it 8%.
Okay. All right. So when you purchase a home, what is the number one factor or some of the factors that are very important in determining the value of the property? I know we talked about location.
I was going to say, that's it. Location. That's
On commercial property, it's really different on commercial property. So
location is still a lot of it, but because you do, and that is dependent on what they're looking for. If somebody needs rail service, or if they need access to certain utilities, or if they're retail and they want to be right in the hub of,
and if there's a renter in the property already.
Right, exactly. So, so commercial is like that. And then investment is different. I mean, still you want to have the right location, but with investment properties, you want to look and see what you can rent it for, or what small things you can do to make it better to sell it for more. And so that's a lot more complicated to get into to determine the.
Right. Okay, when you get ready to buy a piece of property and you're at the attorney's office, the closing costs, won't you tell us a little bit about those, even though I'm the one that should know all that stuff, being a past banker. But I'm going to let you explain it to you. And then I want you to explain who normally pays the closing costs. Closing costs, y'all, are appraisal fees, attorney's fees, et cetera, et cetera. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, residential is different from, of course, commercial. But with residential, if we're talking primarily about residential, it is assumed that the buyer pays for the costs, but there is a negotiation portion on the front page of the contract where you can arrange to have sellers contribute towards those closing costs. And that is done quite often. Say if your buyer doesn't have quite enough cash to get to the 20% threshold and they really want to, you might increase the sales price of the property, but the seller donates more towards the closing costs. And some banks will limit the amount of closing costs that you can negotiate for. So some lender products might only allow 3.5% of the total purchase price for a seller's contribution, so you have to factor that in. But everything's negotiable is basically the bottom line on it.
Right. Okay, when somebody buys improved property, this is kind of a common sense question that that normally people would say, yeah, do it. But I have recognized that a lot of mortgage companies don't require you to get this, and that's a termite inspection. So I don't know why mortgage companies quit making them do that, but it's a common sense tells you everybody would do that, but they don't. They don't require it. But especially if there's not a bank involved, don't you suggest to do that?
Oh yes, and there again, just like inspections, I think the buyer should get their own termite letter. I actually. I guess it was a couple of years ago, I had a young man that was buying houses and fixing them up and flipping them. And we had negotiated for the seller to provide the termite letter. So the seller just brought us a whole new termite inspection treatment. Now, I just treated it for you. Here you go. So the young man fixes the house up and we go to sell it, and the buyer has to get a termite letter. And it is discovered that there's part of the house that is inaccessible because it was too close to the ground.
Right.
And the seller had to literally go dig tunnels under. I mean, he spent weeks digging tunnels to get far enough under the house so that the termite inspectors could get under there. And that's when we discovered why the seller had just treated it for us instead of giving us a clear termite letter. So since then, buyer beware. Buyer does the inspections. Buyer pays for their own inspections, and always get your own.
Okay. So at the closing, when you're getting ready to close a piece of property taxes. Who tells us how that works? Is it prorated? Who pays property taxes? Let's say we close a deal in April, and so tell us how that works.
Well, it's normally very easy. You just prorate it to the date of the purchase.
Right.
And if say the seller has already paid the taxes for that year, then he'll get money back from the buyer for the amount of time that the buyer's going to own it. And if the taxes haven't been paid already, then the seller will give a prorated amount to the buyer. Now, in Hart County, we had those 5-year rebate tax things, that came back on a lot of people, and that was very difficult because it was hard. You couldn't at the time of the sale in any way, form, or fashion determine how much to prorate for those back 5 years of taxes that the seller may owe from their
what
period.
What did they do in those cases?
We had them sign agreements usually saying that we know there is something coming and that the seller will come back and pay their prorated portion of it. But by and large, chasing down the sellers, I mean, gosh, it took so long. At some point, some of the sellers had passed away.
Right.
So now you own the property and those taxes are due.
You had to pay them. So
you had to pay them, and so that was a little bit of a mess when it happened, but we're through that now.
I remember.
And thank goodness we're through that. And
That's
I think everything's going well. And tax assessors, I think y'all did a great job getting through all that. I'm not throwing off on the tax commissioner, but yeah, that was a little bit of a tricky situation back then. But for the most part, it's cut and dried. If you're buying it on June 1st, then you pay them for the first 5 months of taxes.
So when somebody buys a piece of property, commercial property, residential, just land, do you think that every time they should get a new survey, or it depends on how old the survey was done on the last one? Or because you want to know exactly what you're buying, but then again, you don't want to probably get a new one if the seller just had one done a month or two ago. So tell me if
the survey is by somebody who's still in business around here, and it's a fairly recent one, and you don't have any reason to believe that a neighbor's fence is encroaching or something like that, you can probably get away without getting a new survey. It's never a bad idea. But some of these subdivision surveys that all they have, particularly the bigger subdivisions that are really old or over near the lake, you can tell that lot lines have moved over time, that people have started, putting their driveway over here, then you probably definitely want to go get one. And then on the lake too, now anytime you buy to get your new permit, you have to have a projection survey, and that's right off of the edge of the core line so that they can determine where your dock is going to be. And if you're going to have the projection survey done, it's pretty easy to ask them to go ahead and, they'll still charge you extra for it, but pretty easy to ask them to go ahead and just do the four corners for you.
Yeah, so if you have a real old survey that, they used to do boundaries with rocks.
If you have a mix.
You definitely want to get one then.
Yes,
and that kind of goes into our next question. We kind of talked before the show if we even want to talk about it because it's kind of a legal question, but title insurance, and I know that's kind of a legal question, but generally, do you think that's something good people should buy?
It is the least expensive insurance you can buy, and it's only a one-time thing. It insures your right to your title. And if there's something that comes up from the past, the foreclosures that happened so fast, I think they found some things there where the legal work wasn't exactly done, because the banks were doing it so fast and ginning it out, or maybe they didn't have all of the information at hand. So it's never bad to have it. And if you have a loan, a mortgage loan, they're going to require that you buy it for the amount of the loan coverage. And you can get a lender's policy, an owner's policy that is solely yours. And it would be for the whole amount of the property. And it's usually at a discounted rate if you get the owner's policy in addition to the lender's policy. And that owner's policy will cover for the whole amount you purchased it for all the way through your ownership, whereas the lender's policy goes down as you pay off the mortgage. So it's never... I always recommend title insurance, but definitely talk to your closing attorney about it and make that decision with them for yourself.
Play it safe and that kind of thing. So as far as the time frame it takes to usually close a piece of property once somebody makes an offer and it's accepted by the seller, Normally, if a person has cash, naturally, common sense tells us that'll get it closed quicker as compared to going through a bank. So, I worked at a bank for a long time, and I think normally it would take 60 to 90 days to get one closed through us because we require stuff like appraisals and that kind of stuff. But generally, if they have cash, what is it, 30 days? Or, I know you don't,
right.
Nobody knows exact because there's too many variables.
I was going to say, right now, I think probably just because we've had a closing attorney, one of the primary closing attorneys in town has shut up shop and isn't practicing anymore, so all the rest of them are taking on extra closings that they weren't necessarily expecting. So the closing attorneys are taking a little more time now to get the titles done just because they have such an immense amount of work to do. So you can't necessarily say, well, it's cash, so we want to close on Thursday when you take it to them on Monday, because they still have to do a title exam, put together a closing package, that type of thing. So it's not just the lender that's involved in slowing it up. Also, even if you're buying cash, most of the contracts will still have it contingency on appraisal, because just because you're buying cash doesn't mean you want to pay more than the property's worth for it. So, and those appraisals are taking a lot longer now because it's spring and there's a lot of activity.
That's right.
So I would still say count on a month if you're going to close even with cash.
Right.
And then with the lender involved, it's probably closer to 2.
Right. So generally on property now, land, houses on lake lots, they are all coming up in value. I know it depends on the property, again, commercial, what type of property is, where it's located, et cetera, et cetera. But generally, prices have been increasing. Prices
have been increasing, and right now the primary reason for that is because we don't have enough properties on the market. We have more buyers looking for properties than we actually have properties to sell.
Right.
As a buyer's agency last year, about half of my buyer clients, I had to find out what they were looking for in a house and go search somebody who owned that house and ask them to sell it.
Right.
So it's really, with there being less property on the market, but people are feeling more confident in purchasing, then the ones that are going on the market are selling faster and they're selling higher. So we're in a seller's market.
And there are some subdivisions popping up around town. Around town in the county. I see. There's a lot of them that have been out there just waiting for somebody to start building again. So that's what we're going to really need. Is some new builders to kind of make it a more fair market, because right now you have a shortage of sellers, because if I sell my house, what am I going to buy? I can buy somebody else's old house. I can just stay in mine. That's right.
And so once we start having some new construction in various price points, then we can start loosening that up, because people will see what they want to move into and then be willing to sell what they have now to get there.
All right. Okay, Julie, tell us the difference between a listing agent and a buyer's agent.
Well, a listing agent is someone who comes to you, or you come to them and say, I want you to list my house, and we agree on a price, and in that case, I represent the seller of the property. And my job is to get them their highest and best possible price in the shortest amount of time. And I have to defend that diligently, even if I have some information that I know they would take a little bit less than what list price is. I have to keep that confidential. I'm not allowed to just say, well, they have it listed at $150, but they told me they'd sell it for $145. I have to keep that confidential and always fight to get them the highest price. As a buyer's agent, my job is to help somebody who's looking to purchase something. If they sign a buyer's agency agreement with me, is to help them find the property they want and get it for the lowest price, basically. And even if I know that they would pay more for it, I'm not allowed to tell that. I have to keep that confidential. And so the worst scenario, you don't ever want to be a listing agent for one client and your buyer client likes that house, because that puts you in a little bit of a conflict.
That makes sense.
And so that's called dual agency, and I try to avoid that. We'll pass somebody off to another agent in the firm and let them work with them, so I don't have all the information. But buyer's agents they're very, very helpful, particularly if you're trying to get into if you're trying to grow a portfolio of investment properties, buyer's agents can help find properties that aren't even on the market for you, and help you get the lower prices, negotiate better, to start building up what you're going to have as a portfolio.
Right.
And it's interesting trying to make sure you always know who your client is. Say I have a buyer's agency, or I have a listing agency agreement. Someone comes and they want to see that listing.
Right.
They are just my customer at that point. The buyer is just my customer,
right.
and I am representing the seller.
Right.
But they see the house and they don't like it. And they're like, yeah, no, we're just going to keep looking. Well, if I ask them if they want to if they want me to be their buyer's agent at this point, because they're not looking at my listing anymore, and they say, no, we've got some, for sale by owners we want to look at, and that kind of thing. But I know of another house that I think is going to be perfect for them. And I said, well, let's go see this one other house I know of that's listed.
Right.
When I show them that other house, and they fall in love with it and want to make an offer on it, since they said no to taking a buyer's agent, they're still only my customer. And I technically, at that point, am a co-broker for somebody I've never met before. And I still have to keep the confidentialities on that and represent the seller in that instance.
Right.
So, take a buyer's agency from somebody anytime you can, because we can help negotiate down a little bit better and fill
Makes
that out.
All right. Okay, Julie, tell us a little bit about the rental market here in Hartwell, as far as somebody maybe want to invest in a rental house and all the things they need to consider when they do that. Because I know there's a big demand for rental property.
That is for sure. I get 4 calls a day for people wanting to rent something, and I just don't have much. Every so often we'll have some turnover on something that we've been managing, but not very much, because there's a very short supply of rentals in Hartwell. So definitely, if anybody's looking to invest in some real estate, I can help you find some houses that you could purchase, hopefully for cheap enough that you can turn around and make a good rental investment out of that. You definitely want to make sure that you're not paying too much for that house up front. You need to be able to make it pay for itself with the rent income that you can make. You've got to keep in mind that there's going to be some maintenance and repairs.
Right.
If you want to hire somebody else to manage it, Property Source Pros can do that for you.
All right.
But if you want to hire somebody to manage it, you need to incorporate in that expense, and then you've got your property taxes and insurance. You're still going to have to take out of it.
And you need to figure a little bit for yourself.
Right, yeah. But hopefully in the end, if you get it at a low enough price now, you can rent it for a few years and then sell it for a big profit at the
Build
end.
Some equity, build equity over time.
Build some equity. But that is definitely something that we have a shortage of in our community. So
I've been hearing that for like the last 4 or 5 years, rent. So. Okay, Julie, thank you for being on the show. And would you tell us a little bit about your contact information, so if anybody needs to contact you, they know how to do it?
Well, certainly, of course. Hi, my name is Julie Haley. I'm the broker and owner of Property Source Pros. We are located on the square in downtown Hartwell, right next door to the Art Center. The address is 334 East Howell Street. It's at the corner of Carolina and East Howell, across from the courthouse, and we're easy to find. My phone number, if you'd like to call the office, is 706-376-PROS. That's 7767. My email address is julie@propertysourcepros.com. And you can find our website at www.lakehartwellpros.com. We are a full-service real estate firm. We help buyers and sellers on Lake Hartwell and Lake Russell in the Hart area, and Franklin and Elbert. We are also licensed in South Carolina, so we can go across the lake and help with purchases in South Carolina. I also have experience with commercial, retail, sales, purchases, leasing, and do management for both residential and commercial, so I can help you with anything. Just give me a call.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Julie Haley for being on the show, and I want to thank Wes Bailey and Hart Communications. And I will see you next time on Money Talks.